Hi, I'm Clinton Carew, and welcome to Align with AI Innovation podcast, brought to you by MacEwan University School for Continuing Education. This is a limited series podcast that delves into the multifaceted world of AI and data with industry-leading experts. MacEwan University will soon be offering a slate of courses and certificates centered around these important topics, and we are here to talk to industry experts who can share insight into implementing these technologies responsibly and effectively. My guest today is Yuliya Fakhr, and she is the founder of the Bright North Learning Lab. It's an organization that collaborates with educational institutions like MacEwan, nonprofits, and mission-driven organizations in order to design educational programs and professional development solutions that bridge the gap between education and the future of AI and data work. Is that a pretty good description, do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. I would just want to add, one of my biggest values in my work to kind of level the field, kind of equip everyone with skills in this explosion of new tech.
Right.
So that people can actually feel empowered to kind of ride the wave and reach new heights.
Right.
So it's like, I do have this equity kind of value that is important for me in the work. And that's kind of why I like to provide the educational content.
I think that's great. So there are people out there who would be an excellent whatever in the world of data, and what you do is provide them with the technological kind of foundations that they require in order to be able to do something that they would otherwise be excellent at.
Yes, but even not in technical fields as well, right?
Sure.
So again, in this explosion of tech, if you're not using AI, you're falling behind, right? So falling behind in productivity and possibilities and creativity, even as controversial as that sounds. So if someone is unaware or not sure how to use it, they're going to fall behind their colleagues, right? Or even behind their classmates, depending on where they're at in their careers, right?
Right. That's great. So it sounds to me like you consider AI and data knowledge to be a foundational skill now.
I do, and I also consider it a great enabler to having a good career.
In terms of the work that you've done, so when we talk about the work that you've done personally, was there a time where learning some of these foundational data and AI skills suddenly opened up an avenue to you that you didn't know was even there?
As I mentioned, I am a scientist by training.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in school studying science, and a lot of time in school isolated from the other aspects of life. So, starting a business, there's a lot of things that you might not know. Well, I might not know, especially as an immigrant, especially not having family around who has businesses active in Canada or in Alberta, right? So there's this knowledge gap. And, I've always wanted to venture into the business world. I just found it severely overwhelming.
Sure.
And I just didn't know where to start. And, actually, I would say it's because of the prompting, learning how to prompt, and basically having the AI tools available for me. I was actually finally able to muster up not just the courage, but the confidence to actually navigate that.
Yeah.
But also just prompting okay, act as a business advisor for a small startup and tell me what are the key considerations for acquiring funding for this, or what are the key considerations for taxes, or if I take this step, what are the tax implications for this? What can I do with my business accounts, right? So things obviously you should verify, but it's always nice to have that breadth of information, especially if you have that really big gap just from your way of thinking or from what you've been exposed to in life. So that's one way it's really helped me. And since then, I've just become way more confident, and I've taken up the learning up a notch, I would say. But it definitely did the foundations of giving me just the confidence to be like, wow, I am not completely clueless. I have this partner,
Yeah.
this AI partner that can actually help me with.
So because you weren't coming from a place of having done a lot of business or from a family of business people or surrounded by a community of business people, having access to AI tools kind of gave you almost like access to shared expertise that you wouldn't
Yes,
otherwise have.
exactly.
Yeah.
I would just like to clarify because my dad, I think, will kill me
Yeah.
if I didn't. He is a business person. He's
Right.
just not in the country, so I don't have that direct access to him from business advice. But yes,
Yeah.
anything else you said was accurate.
But even then, I mean, sometimes as someone who also has parents, if there are things that you don't want to ask your parents,
Of course.
even if they are
And
subject matter experts.
and you know, this is the great thing about AI is I just love that it's like a million perspectives
Yeah.
into one. I mean, I'm not saying it's not biased and the
Oh, yeah.
perspectives aren't biased. All data is biased. I mean, I think like the great thing about AI nowadays is that you can use it in both business and also interpersonal
Right.
things, right? Like navigating difficult conversations, like asking AI to give you options or phrasing things in a less biased way, in a less
Right.
confrontational way, right? So
Yeah.
I think like it's very, very valuable for offering different perspectives.
That's really interesting. I love that idea because I think a lot of times when I think of AI, I look at it from a monolithic standpoint, right? Because it comes from often some of the giant companies in the world. And you go, oh, I'm going to go to this monolithic entity in order to get some ideas. But the idea that it actually provides this additional access instead of uh, um, biased as it may or may not be, but nonetheless, it's that's an interesting approach, I think.
Yeah, I think it also like depends on like I acknowledge what you're saying, but also like one way to go around that is to like prompt it in a way where it's giving you different options, pros and cons for everything,
Right.
risks for everything. And then based on its analysis of your situation and your character, because again, like it's interesting, but once you start working with AI and you have like this working history with it, it
Yeah.
almost has like a very clear understanding of your values.
It's okay for information to be biased, but I guess it's good to understand which way it's biased in. You know what I mean?
Yes, and that is something you can definitely prompt as well when using your AI tool, right? So
Right.
you can see, I guess, like one fancy way to call this is like meta prompting is like
Right.
anytime it gives you an output, you're like, okay, now act as a blah, 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 and identify the gaps in this answer and also what are the risks if this decision is made and what are the cons and pros.
Right.
If someone external were to see this without some like information, what would they say when they see it, right? So like
Yeah.
there's different ways where you can gather different perspectives and kind of make it almost self-assess.
Like make the AI argue with itself. Yeah, that's
Yes.
interesting. One of the reasons why we're really excited to have you in is because you have a lot of our guests have kind of a data science background, whereas your background is science
Mm-hmm.
and then data.
Yes.
Like because of course you can't graduate from any scientific program without having to deal with statistics, having to deal with the methodologies of data.
Mm-hmm.
But like you started first from a medical perspective.
Yeah, very biomedical, researching stem cells
Wow.
and how stem cells develop and produce hormones and pregnancy disorders and what are some pharmaceutical targets.
So imagine, I know this isn't your world exactly anymore, but imagine you're now working with the CEO of a new biotech firm.
Mm-hmm.
And they're working on some research that is similar to some of the research that you might have done in the past, working with stem cells, finding out the way that the body is reacting to different
Mm-hmm.
chemicals and compounds. And they want to institute more AI in their research. What's the way
That's
of
a
doing
fun
that?
question. I would start with asking bigger picture things.
Okay.
I know like there's different ways to approach AI in health, but my first question would be, what exactly is the most pressing issue in pregnancy, right?
Oh, wow.
What is something that investors would be interested in funding as a pregnancy, either medicine or tool or app, or right, because each of these have different risks, and AI can like really help you outline everything and make you, again, like I mentioned, help you make an educated decision. After that, I would ask it, if we settled on a pharmaceutical, right, I'd be like, scrape the web and tell me what are some medications that are already approved to be used in pregnancy, and how else can they potentially interact with the placenta if that's my interest, right? What are some of the receptors that they can target in the placenta based on previous research, right? And based on that, I'd find my pharmaceutical target and then start my experimentation rather than read a little bit. Because again, like, there's infinite knowledge. So I would kind of start working backwards by asking, what would the health system fund? What would investors fund for clinical trials? And then I would ask, what's the fastest way to get it done? What are some key experiments? What are some key proofs of concept that I need to deliver for it to actually showcase that, like, this target is effective, or this is the target. And then after that, because again, you know, depending on where you're at, what departments you're at, sometimes that's their focus. They don't go beyond that. So then I would ask it, how would I be able to go beyond that within the scope of my department if my department isn't, you know, maybe equipped for that kind of support? Well, who else can I partner with, right? So asking it for partnerships, different grants. Again, possibilities are endless.
So with endless possibilities, how do we, as business leaders of the future, put ourselves in a position that we pick an AI project that's going to help us versus an AI project that might turn into a dead end for us financially down the road?
It's really hard to know, and it honestly depends on your industry, right? Like, I'll speak from health. I guess, like, you know, a lot of health innovators want to focus on something that's really accurate. Like, they'll come to you and they're like, you know what, this predicts this with 99% accuracy. And then you're like, okay, but is there a cure? Because if there isn't, what's the point? I don't want to know. Is it even ethical to let someone know that they have this disease with 99% accuracy, or like 99% accuracy for 5-year mortality rate? No one wants to know that. I mean, it can be helpful, but it can be helpful from a planning perspective, right? Those are all things you should be thinking about when you're making a decision of what to use, right? Is the data available to train the model? That's even before when you're designing something, right? And with health data, things get really complicated, right? And sometimes you have access, sometimes you don't, depending on where you're at in the world, right? And if you want to train it on data that's diverse, because you want, you know, you want your tool to be able to be deployed everywhere. You can't just train it in one place. That can be complex as well, because, you know, like, cross jurisdictional data sharing can get really, really complex, especially with sensitive data.
I imagine also that there are places where the reason why they have more data isn't always for good reasons.
Correct. So again, data governance in different jurisdictions is very, very different. And sometimes, you know, sometimes people take advantage of that to train their models, whether it's good or bad, I'm not going to say, but yeah.
But you have to at least think about it.
But yes, of course. And that sometimes also poses a risk for your tool, right? Because, you know, breaches, lawsuits.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. And it's interesting because we, of course, when we're talking about AI from a standpoint of ethics is always really close to the surface. But when it comes to AI in medicine, ethics takes on I think a even heavier weight because it literally is life or death.
It's life or death, it's patient safety, it's
Right.
patient satisfaction, right? But I think like the other ethics that sometimes we don't talk about is like maybe clinician satisfaction, right? Like how comfortable are they, using this tool,
Right.
like seeing those decisions being made. Like I mentioned, right? If
Yeah.
someone gets like a 5-year mortality, but then but there's no cure, then the clinician is put in a position where they have to communicate this, but also it puts a lot of pressure on the physician as well,
Right.
as well as developing a tool that maybe, again, isn't. We have a clinician burnout problem, right?
Oh, yeah.
So adding to their existing workflow or adding to their existing tasks is not something that is ethical,
Right.
right? Because it can have many, many downstream effects on the clinician and inevitably on patient care quality, right?
Right.
So again, the ethics from the clinician perspective should also be really, really considered. And the system as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Like if your system does not have the funding to maybe provide that care for you or, I don't know, allocate resources for this particular thing, like it's
Right.
also unethical to be working on this thing, right? Because it's just, AI isn't free.
No.
It's really expensive.
Yeah.
And we've all seen its effects on the environment, right? So sometimes like you don't actually have to use AI to solve a problem, right? I think people, even though I love AI, I think people sometimes like are just pasting AI on everything right now because it's all the hype. And I am actually very against that. I think like you really need to evaluate the situation first, kind of see the context for everything. And if the easiest solution is AI, use AI. But if the solution is, I don't know, a Post-it, use the Post-it.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need to turn the light on.
It's not as sexy as AI.
Yeah.
But it's way more ethical to use that than to develop this whole system.
A lot of these things we look at on an individual level, and it's impossible not to because we're individuals. But you take some of these health outcomes, and you talked about it really concretely there. That we take it and we expand it. Like, what does it mean on a system level for us to try to find a new solution? A solution might be ultimately unwanted, right? So that's a negative side of it. But what is a potentially positive side of it in terms of like health outcomes or other things that like we could be looking at provincially, even in Alberta, using AI tools as an example?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing for me is moving from a reactive health intervention to a preventative or predictive, where you can almost where a population on a whole can have the power to be resilient, to absorb any shocks, to avoid risk, or plan earlier to mitigate risk, right? So for me, it's the proactivity, the prevention, and the resilience of a population that really is one of the most exciting things for AI in health on a systemic level.
In a province like Alberta, is there something that we can be doing to help create an ecosystem in which use of these kind of advanced AI tools is more effective?
Yeah, I think we're kind of already on the path to that. There's a lot of federal funding that's been injected into AI applications in health. There's a lot of provincial funding that's been injected as well. There's a lot of ecosystem support and championing. So a lot of government individuals are very on board with deploying AI and revolutionizing the industries, especially health, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, I mean, obviously we can always do more and we can do better and there can be more alignment. And I think part of that is communication. So people love working in silos. And people love thinking what they're doing is the best way to do something. And I think people need to stop doing that and actually talk to each other and, communicate to each other in a way that's understandable and keeps, the audience in mind, right? So the way you're communicating something is changing depending on who you're talking to, right? And so, like, for example, the innovators, they want something that's going to scale really fast. So all they focus about is speed, 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 speed. So someone talking to them might think, oh, they don't care about rigor like us researchers do, right? Or clinicians, they can be like, well, we want safety and we want something that's, usable.
Right.
That actually matters for patient outcomes. And so they're all speaking like different languages and focusing on different outcomes, but sometimes it's actually they're all the same thing. They don't know how to communicate with each other, or they're not put in a situation where they can communicate effectively, right? So I think communicating outcomes that are relevant to your audience is really important in moving this mission forward. And again, having this energy of collaboration going into something. We've seen in COVID, when the world put itself together to put a vaccine, there was no there was no precedent to the amount of collaboration that the COVID vaccine had, right? People were sharing papers. Anytime anyone found something, they would publish it, right? Everyone was on board. The government was on board. The health system was on board. So the way it was deployed was fast and quick, and it was done, right? So we all saw the power of like when everyone is on board and when everyone is prioritizing something, how it happens. And I think like we just need to think of it as this is another opportunity for all of us to collaborate, be open with each other, and actually move the needle forward, but also think about responsibilities and work on the governance and the safety part and the responsible application part with the same rigor and same collaboration as the deployment part and the design part as well.
Yeah. And are there some skills or tools that you think we should be looking to make sure that people are learning in order to facilitate this kind of work?
I think everyone should educate themselves on AI governance. Everyone who is using AI should educate themselves on AI governance and data governance, learning how your data is used, learning about privacy principles, learning about how to use AI and what data is very, very good for you to learn and to apply, because then you become aware of the system around you, and then you become also aware of your contributions to responsible AI, right? So I think that's very important. The other important one is, again, leading difficult conversations. That's a very important skill. I'd say everyone needs to learn to have, right? Because, change is tricky, change is stressful, change can be very tense, and when people don't talk, that never diffuses the situation, and that almost never moves things forward. It actually stalls everything. So I think having conversations, asking questions, like open-ended questions, just learning that skill is something that can really help move the needle forward.
It's interesting because it sounds like you're saying that there is no implementation of an AI strategy that isn't also a change management strategy.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, at the core of it, any new tech, it's a huge change management plan. People are always resistant. There's always fear. There's always paranoia. And then you have like the early adopters who are just using it. Then you have also the bad actors that are using it for personal gain and not thinking about consequences, right? So it's history repeats itself. So
it's interesting because you think of what happens whenever there's a new technology, and the two things that you just pointed out there is that as soon as there's a new technology, somebody's first impulse is, how do I exploit this?
Yeah.
And somebody else's first impulse is, how do I never have to use this?
Yeah. How do I use this to my benefit?
Yeah.
And how do I avoid situations where this will be used on me, or I will have to interact with it, or it will replace me, or yeah. So like, again, the fears are very common. We've seen this before. And I think we just need to communicate openly, adapt, have an adaptable mindset, and be willing to accept the change because it's coming anyway.
Yeah, you can't stop it, right? So we talk a lot about technology, and obviously this podcast is about the AI technology and data. But I think you touched on a lot of interesting things in the world of kind of governance in the way of. So when you look past the technology, what does a mature data-ready culture even look like?
I think a mature data culture is when you actually think about the data before you start collecting the data.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not like a byproduct of your operations. It's actually you're collecting it by design, right? Okay. So collecting it in a standardized way, in an interoperable way where it can interact with multiple systems and the systems won't crash, or they don't have a different format for the data to be entered, right? So this all needs to be kind of scoped out before you start collecting, right? The other thing I talked about is governance. So again, determining rules for who's accessing the data, where the data is stored, who is governing the data, who's responsible for each aspect of the data governance, right? How this data is shared, because, there's also such thing as we're taking it too far on the protective side. And then you're having, this organization where data is basically fragmented and so siloed that departments can't collaborate properly because they don't have proper data sharing structures to support their work, right? So you need to figure out a way that's conducive both to the privacy and confidentiality and risks of the data, as well as creating that trusting and collaborative an interconnected environment in an organization. And for me personally, that's one of the most important aspects, just figuring out that balance before you start collecting data.
I think that's great because on one hand, we have, when people talk about data governance, it's really easy to look at it just from the context of protect.
Yes.
But in terms especially of medical research, if there is no sharing, the data almost has no value.
Correct. And, not sharing data is a huge problem in healthcare, right? We do have a saying that data saves lives, you know? If a physician doesn't have all your data to act accordingly and make a decision. So, we always think about data from the aspect of privacy and security and who's accessing what, but we need to think about it from a collaborative approach as well, and building trust and actually using data to, mitigate risk.
Right. Thanks a lot, Yuliya, for coming in and talking with me today. This has been the Align with AI Innovation Podcast. I'm your host, Clinton Carew, and our engineer is John Johnson. I'd also like to give special thanks to the entire New Initiative team at MacEwan University School of Continuing Education. Be sure to check out the new AI and data courses being offered and visit macewan.ca/AI innovation for more information.